For a DC council presser. Okay. All right. You can hear me? Mic check, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Where did you go? Somewhere nice? Where? That's nice. Actually, it's probably cooler there. Well, let me be the first to welcome you back. No, you're welcome to sit over here. Yeah, I know. That's, you think you can lob more shots from over there. We're good. Good afternoon. This is the press conference that I have before legislative meeting, and actually this press conference and tomorrow's legislative meeting are a little different than the usual because tomorrow, May 29th, we will be voting our first vote on the proposed budget for fiscal year 2025. The mayor submitted this to the council beginning of April. I think it was April 2nd. The committees had hearings throughout the month of May, throughout the month of April. The committees marked up their recommendations at the end of the month or the first week of May. And now tomorrow or to this afternoon, I'm circulating to members a proposed report, a committee print for the fiscal year 2025 budget. Also will be the proposed committee print for the and report for the Budget Support Act. The supplemental for FY24, that's the revised budget for FY24, we will be approving at second reading on the budget. So that would be at our June 12th meeting. The council's already acted on the Federal Portion Budget Request Act. That was a vote at the, I believe it was May 7th was the date. The dates are all a little confused in my mind. That's our request to Congress with regard to federal discretionary funds that they budget every year for the district. So that request went, as I said, about a month ago. With budget autonomy, we vote separately on the district's budget itself, the local funds budget together with the gross budget. And that's what the order of business tomorrow will be. The committee of the whole meeting at 11 and probably starting pretty close to then because I think everything's pretty much worked out. The committee of the whole will meet at 11. That's where all the action will be on the Budget Support Act for tomorrow. We will then have a legislative meeting where, as a legislature, the council will vote on both of those measures. I believe for tomorrow, there's one emergency measure on the agenda. I don't think that's controversial. It's simply continuing the Secure DC Act, which was approved on an emergency basis pending congressional review, 60 days congressional review. So there'll be a gap unless we act tomorrow to extend the emergency. I don't think there'll be any debate about that tomorrow. When the mayor transmitted her proposed budget to the council in early April, many criticized it as not about sharing sacrifice and instead hitting low-income residents the hardest. For example, cutting the Access to Justice program by about 60%, cutting domestic violence programming, cutting the emergency rental assistance funding by over 50%, no new vouchers for affordable housing, eliminating the pay equity program for early education childcare. I do want to note that a big part of that elimination was a result of a disagreement the mayor had with the chief financial officer, where I agreed with the mayor regarding that and indicated that I would be restoring that elimination that was forced on her by the chief financial officer. But other aspects of this budget that was not seen as being about shared sacrifice. forcing approximately 80 schools to lay off teachers, cutting educational programs like community schools and the DC Futures program, eliminating the baby bonds program, freezing the earned income tax credit. The budget that the mayor proposed was criticized as less about shared sacrifice and more about cutting programs than about helping the last, the lost, and the least. The council's reworked that, and the budget being presented tomorrow, circulated now, not only restores cuts in education, social justice, and affordable housing, but also resets the district on the path to fight poverty and promote social justice. So to get into some specifics, the print that I'm circulating for tomorrow's consideration fully restores the budget for access to justice to $30.7 million. The mayor had proposed cutting access to justice by over $20 million. Over half of the access to justice funding is directed to housing interventions, such as in landlord-tenant court to prevent evictions, and more than 40,000 residents utilized access to justice services in 2023. The print also restores the district's earned income tax credit to an 85% match of recipients' federal earned income tax credit for tax year 2024 and maintains it at 85% through the financial plan, and then it would go to 100%, which was our original intent. The legislation establishes, or the budget establishes, a child tax credit for households with at least one child aged 6 years or younger, and a household income of $120,000 for married couples filing separately, $192,000 for single and head of household filers, $240,000 for joint filers. The maximum refundable credit is $420 and will be available for tax year 2025. This will cost $15 million each year through the financial plan. I'm hopeful that over the next few years that we will continue to grow the child tax credit, but this puts a stake in the ground for starting this program as another in a series of efforts by the council over the years to try to have more equity in our community. The bill also increases the clean hands threshold for non-DMV debt from $100 to $1,000. Right now, a person cannot get or renew, for instance, a professional license or get a permit from the Department of Buildings or do any business with the district. If they owe more than $100, that's an amount that was set in the early 1990s. Except for DMV debt, the committee print being circulated will raise that to $1,000. The idea here is that poverty or low income should not be a barrier to being able to get on one's feet or stay on one's feet. With regard to education, the print that I'm circulating maintains what was approved at the committee of the whole meeting several weeks ago in shifting approximately $25 million from central DCPS to individual schools, consistent with the law that was adopted by the council in the December of 2022, called Schools First in Budgeting. In my view, it's inexcusable that schools, and we saw that this hit the hardest Ward 8 schools, have to struggle with cuts, laying off teachers, reducing resources for teaching kids, especially in schools with a high number of at-risk students. And so we're reversing what was proposed and reallocating $25.4 million to individual schools. Also, with regard to education, public education, adding about $3.5 million to provide one additional permanent teaching position for each elementary school in Ward 7 and 8, where we have the highest concentration of at-risk students. The budget includes almost $1 million to continue lead testing and remediation services in our charter schools, restores the facilities increase for charter schools to the 3.1% level that the council adopted a couple years ago. So the charter schools will continue to get the facilities increase as had been the law, has been the law. We're maintaining that. The budget restores at the level of $70 million, the Early Childhood Education Pay Equity Fund. This includes funding for healthcare, which I will note is there is a copay by the individuals. This is not entirely paid by the government, healthcare. In any event, brings it back to the $70 million level. The budget restores the DC Futures program for those who are enrolled in it currently, so there would not be new enrollees. There was a lot of testimony from students who had gotten into the DC Futures program. This is post-secondary education, college education at local universities, and we're now being told that they were being terminated from the program. The program was being canceled. Well, we're going to continue the program until all of them graduate. $2.5 million for the to restore the community schools program through the Office of the State Superintendent. With regard to housing, the Committee on Housing chaired by Councilmember Robert White had found funding for approximately 200 additional vouchers. It's a little bit more than that. The print I'm circulating adds to that, so there will be a total of 477 new housing vouchers, most of which will be permanent supportive housing, but not entirely. And with regard to housing, increasing the Housing Production Trust Fund. So what the mayor had proposed was a budget of, I think it was 59 million, and we're increasing it to 80 million. Housing Production Trust Fund, not quite where we were a few years ago, but nonetheless trying to maintain that program at a more adequate level. $5 million additional for the Housing Preservation Fund. A total of $26.9 million for emergency rental assistance. Mayor had proposed a lower figure. Councilmember White's committee was able to increase that, and we maintain that in what I'm circulating. $2 million for street outreach, which deals with homelessness. 1.8 million additional for a total of 11.5 million for homeless prevention services for both individuals and families. And $700,000 in the nuisance abatement fund, which of course correlates to housing nuisances in some neighborhoods. With regard to the environment, the Committee on Transportation and the Environment did a lot of work to get about, I have my notes here say about $20 million for various environmental programs such as the Green Bank and home electrification. We were able to find additional money, about $7 million additional. Some of that will go to the Green Bank. Some of that, about $880,000 to the Affordable Home Electrification Program, $500,000 to Solar for All, and $4 million for the green infrastructure maintenance. There's not much point to having green infrastructure if it's not maintained. There's a cost there. And the impact of that actually is beneficial to our waterways as well as other environmental benefits. And that's why the maintenance is important. I believe that had been zeroed out in the proposed budget, and we now have over $4 million for that. Moving on to some other issues in public safety, the budget fully funds the mayor's request for sworn police officers. My notes here say 3,370 because that's what the chief testified to. I think the budget book has a higher number. The important thing is that what the mayor requested is what I'm confident the council will be voting for this, so I will say that what the mayor requested is what the council will be approving in terms of funding for the number of sworn officers, which would be an increase. We're also, with what I'm circulating, reversing the cut to FTEs in the Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services. Adding funding for domestic violence services, about $6.7 million, and shifting the Office of Independent Juvenile Justice Facilities Oversight, basically the DYRS monitor, moving it from within DYRS to the DC Auditor's Office. To do this, the committee has made a number of cuts to committees, for example, with regard to schools, funding in schools, shifting funds from central DCPS to individual schools, finding some savings within the Office of the State Superintendent of Education. I think most of that was what we call salary lapse, or reducing somewhat the growth in contracts. But there also are some tax proposals in this budget that I'm circulating for tomorrow. The mayor had proposed increasing the payroll tax that was originally adopted in relationship to the Universal Paid Leave Program. She had proposed increasing that to 0.62%. And with what I'm circulating, it will be increased to 0.75%, which generates an additional $76 million for next year. Also, for the first time, creating greater progressivity with regard to our real property tax. So high-value homes, which would include condominium units, will be taxed at a higher rate. Let me explain how this works. So for homes over $2.5 million in value, $2.5 million is the threshold, and that will be indexed to inflation, so people will not appreciate into this. That the rate will be 85 cents per $100. That's the current rate, up to $2.5 million in assessed value. The increment over $2.5 million would be taxed at a $1 rate. So for example, a $2.6 million house, the 2.5 million would be taxed at the rate of 85 cents. That's the current rate. And that additional $100,000 in valuation would be taxed at the $1 rate. So for that $2.6 million house, the effect would be $184 more in tax. That's an annual figure. The Committee on Business and Economic Development had recommended eliminating the exemption on interest earned on out-of-state municipal bonds. I believe we're the only jurisdiction in the country that doesn't tax interest earned on out-of-state municipal bonds. What I'm circulating modifies that slightly. Instead of it taking effect this year, meaning that those investors who have municipal bonds this year would be paying tax this year on interest earned this year. Well, maybe paying tax next year, but on interest earned this year. So we're delaying the applicability to next year. That allows for changes in investment decisions if a investor so wishes. And then we're also broadening the bonds that would continue to be exempt. So what the committee had recommended was bonds, district government issued bonds, and we're broadening that to include WMATA issued bonds, DC water issuances, DC Housing Finance Agency issuances. So there's more choice on the part of bond investors if they wish to maintain the tax exempt status. With regard to taxes, what I'm circulating repeals or does not implement the mayor's proposed tax on hotel stays. And what I'm circulating increases the property tax credit for small retailers. So right now, a retailer who has gross receipts under $2.5 million a year can get up to $5,000 credit on real property taxes paid either directly because they own the property or through a Schedule J that is for the rent that they pay, the property tax portion of the rent that they pay. We're doubling that credit from $5,000 to $10,000 and increasing the gross receipts threshold from $2.5 million to $3 million. The tax credit will also be indexed to inflation. This tax credit is available to qualified businesses based on either the amount of real property taxes or a percentage of rent paid on a qualified retail location. It's for retailers, small retailers. In 2020, I don't know why that's the most recent year I have, but in 2020, the second year of the credit, 671 small retailers claimed the tax credit. Now, some of you may be wondering about the disagreement that there was some noise about a month ago between the mayor and me on the one hand and the chief financial officer on the other hand. What is in the Budget Support Act that's being circulated is four to be exact, provisions that improve cash flow, which is what the chief financial officer has been concerned about. And those four provisions are, first, that any revenue increases in the revenue estimates that exceed what was in the last revenue estimate on which this budget is based will be dedicated to the fiscal stabilization fund. So both the mayor and the council will be precluded from trying to take any of those increased revenues and using them for other purposes. They will go first to the fiscal stabilization reserve fund. Second, that if the fiscal stabilization reserve is not full as of the FY 2025 ACFR, that's our annual comprehensive financial report, which comes out in February 1st of 2026. Then the FY27 budget, which we will approve in May of 2026, will budget the replenishment of the reserves. So rather than replenishing the reserves this year through appropriation or the financial plan, this says that if those reserves are still not full, then we will budget it 2 years from now. Third, we're increasing the cap on the cash flow reserve account by approximately $200 million to 10% of the general fund operating budget. So there'll be more money in the reserves when they're fully funded. And then fourth, giving authority to the chief financial officer to use other large reserve accounts for temporary cash flow purposes. The goal being here that we do have a number of pots of money, if you will, besides the reserve accounts that the chief financial officer will dip into when we have what we call troughs in cash flow. And we're increasing the number of pots that the chief financial officer can access. This is all for what I'll call short-term borrowing for cash flow purposes. The district government has what is called a cash flow trough in February and August of each year. If you think about it, February is a month before the real property tax collections come in, 2 months before the income tax is due. And August is a month before the real property tax collections come in. So those are when we have the least amount of cash. Even though the government, our budget is balanced, our spending is within revenues, it's a liquidity issue. And so this short-term borrowing from existing accounts, cash that we have, helps with regard to the cash flow. I do want to note that there's several provisions that are in what I'm circulating that are intended to help with regard to businesses. For instance, I mentioned we're eliminating the mayor's proposed tax on hotels. That's a new tax on hotels, eliminating that. I've mentioned doubling the small retailer property tax credit. What I'm circulating fully funds the fiscal impact statement that was issued in conjunction with what's called the BEST Act. The BEST Act simplifies the licensing requirement for businesses, simplifies and also reduces the fees. This was adopted by the council over a year ago, but has a fiscal cost to it. And the mayor had proposed fully funding it. The committee in markup had recommended lower level. What I'm circulating fully funds that fiscal impact statement so that the BEST Act can go into effect fully, and it will be easier on businesses, actually on homeowners too, if they need permits. And I will note that the provisions in the budget that address public safety, such as the significant increase in the Metropolitan Police Department budget, coupled with funding additional officers, that improving public safety is also good for businesses. The last thing I want to say is that I do share the concern that many have expressed that are we, meaning the mayor and the council, doing enough to control expenditures? The budget that the mayor submitted to the council was roughly $1 billion more than the current year budget. The council's actions do not add much to that. We did a calculation, adds about 40 million, which is a very small percentage on top of what the mayor had proposed. But I do have that concern that we need to be looking at expenditures. So we are going to have at least one additional staff person in the council budget office. This will be a new position tasked with beginning to grow our capacity to more thoroughly look at agency expenditures with an eye toward efficiency and effectiveness. As you know, in a number of areas, we have multiple programs, some of which are overlapping, some of which are more effective than others, and taking a closer look at that with an eye toward maintaining effectiveness. We want our programs to be effective and ensuring some efficiency so we're not just wasting money. So I'm hopeful that by next year we will have a better ability to look at the expenditure side of this budget. As I started out by saying, our goal, and I think that what the council's been able to do with the budget, is to ensure programs that transform people's lives, help children, and continue the war on poverty. And with that, I'm happy to take questions. Yes, Sam.
Question about DC futures. How much for fiscal year 2025, and how exactly did the funds get restored?
And how exactly what?
How exactly did the funds get restored?
It's 4.3 million for next year. The amount goes down because it's only for the existing enrollees to continue in the program. And the program is basically a subsidy program. So it's like students who go to Trinity. And so what is winding down is the number of students, not the academic programs themselves at Trinity or the other universities. So it's 4.3 million in the first year. I don't remember the exact number over the 4-year plan. I'm going to say it's probably about 11 million. You asked me where the money came from. You're probably going to ask that about a lot of things. That's not quite how the budget works. I try to find sources and add them all up, create a big pot, and then I look for uses and then drain that pot. So the source was the big pot.
So you said you look for, I didn't catch that word. You look for something and drain
I
that.
look for sources to fill this pot of money, if you will, and then drain that pot for uses, sources and uses.
Gotcha.
The only direct link, I think I talked about this in what I'm circulating, the only direct link is that we tie the baby bonds program to opening up sports wagering. Yes.
Can I ask about the housing vouchers you
Are
proposed?
you asking permission to ask
Two-
a question?
I'm not actually. You asked for 200 something more, if did I get that number?
Yes.
Yeah, how did you, I'm curious how you arrived to that, considering the issues we've had with getting vouchers out the door for this fiscal year. How are you confident that hundreds more would be actually acted on?
Well, I'm not fully confident because we've been through this, we've been to this rodeo a number of times. We put a lot of money in for vouchers and then find that there are a lot that have not been gone out the door. This year, Department of Human Services used a lot of the money for vouchers just to cover overspending in other programs. But there've been some conversations with DHS, and the vouchers that they have will, we're told, will be fully utilized. That is, there'll be none left over by the end of this year. And that they think they have the capacity for the additional vouchers. That's one way we looked at or arrived at the number. And the other was that we identified an amount of money, which I'm going to say was around $11 million. And how many vouchers does that get us? That's in addition to the work that the Housing Committee did under Councilmember Robert White.
And did the bike lane proposal from the Transportation Committee last in your proposal?
Oh, that dropped out. It dropped out because I don't think that, the council normally does not vote on bike lanes, and I don't think the council should be voting on bike lanes, whatever your view. And I don't mean you, I mean, you're like the big you're. Yes.
Chairman, can you talk about the plans to restore the pay equity fund? Because initially the council had planned to partially restore. So what changed there?
We were able to find dollars, the big pot that got drained. The mayor's thinking had been to reduce the pay equity program to about $53 million a year. And then with the CFO's insistence that the fiscal stabilization reserve be fully restored, she took the $217 million and redirected it to the reserve fund. The mayor didn't want to do that. And I have to keep emphasizing that because she gets criticized for eliminating pay equity. That's not what she wanted to do. She did want to reduce it, however. So when I said early on that I was going to reverse that move. And when I reversed it, that put $217 million back, or $53 million a year. We found funding for health insurance, which is about $12 million a year. That gets it up to about 65 million. And then through discussions with various people, felt that there needed to be more. So it's up to 70 million.
And if I can do a follow-up going off of that, when we're talking about fiscal reserves, can you talk about the plans about not addressing those reserves? How did that decision come to be to address it down the road if needed? And you kind of tied into it a little bit, but it helped you as far as funding of other programs as well.
Well, your question is about the reserves. Our government is very financially responsible. Now, I know that might sound self-serving, but actually we have over the years done a number of things that are very financially responsible. For instance, we have 4 reserve funds. 2 are required by Congress, but we added 2 more. And in fact, fiscal stabilization is one of the ones that we added. We've taken other steps, like for instance, this government has always been good about fully funding the pension programs. So we don't have that problem that other jurisdictions have. We have a policy to encourage more use of what we call pay-as-you-go funding for our capital projects. So we're not doing capital entirely on borrowing. The Home Rule Act imposes a requirement on a limit on borrowing that is equal to, I think it's 17% of our expenditures. Local law, it's 12%. These are all ways that we are evidencing, or all ways that evidence my claim that we are a very fiscally responsible government. The issue with the reserves at first blush seemed to be about the reserves, but over time we realized that what the chief financial officer was concerned about was liquidity. Now, the Home Rule Act requires that the council adopt a balanced budget. Specifically, what it says is expenditures cannot exceed available resources. That's not a liquidity issue, but liquidity is a legitimate concern, and the chief financial officer has said that based on spending trends, that we will have a liquidity issue in 4 years, in 2028. We could wait until then. I would rather still the waters, so to speak. And so we have those four provisions that are in the Budget Support Act that address liquidity. I think we can say with confidence that this government, the council intends or is serious about ensuring that liquidity is not an issue. I've had many conversations with the CFO. I'm not going to speak for him.
But as far as him being knowledgeable about this.
He
proposal,
knows what's in the Budget Support Act. Yes.
So I wanted to ask more about the new residential property tax on the high value homes. You know,
Yes.
you're at that $2.5 million limit. I know other dollar thresholds have been discussed by the TRC and others. So how did you land on 2.5 million? Why was that the right?
Lots of discussions. And I could say that there were lots of proposals that were different than this, but there's consensus around this proposal. That's how we landed with it. I think it's a good thing that we're creating more progressivity with our real property tax. And just to be clear, in tax terms, when I talk about progressivity, that means people with more wealth pay a higher percentage of their income or wealth toward taxes than people of little wealth. That's progressivity in tax terms. And typically real property tax has no progressivity around it. So I think this is a good thing. There were some who argued that the threshold should be higher than 2.5. There were a few who argued that it should be lower than 2.5. 2.5 seems to be a number around which there is consensus.
And I also wanted to ask about sports betting. I think we discussed this a little bit before. The lottery is probably going to come back with like a 2-year extension for the contract extension with Intralot. How will you be viewing that request in light of what you're doing?
I
with the
see
rest
them
of
as two distinct actions. So I see, what do we do with the lottery contract, which is important. And as I understand, the contract expires this summer, so something needs to happen. And I don't think there's been a full RFP process around it. So we're going to have to address that. I don't see that as impacted by this. This meaning that we're opening the door for more competition, more platforms for those who wish to wager on sports. Yes, Mark.
So just a couple of quick things and then more into the mayor's proposal for the sales tax increase, you leave that as she proposed?
Yeah, that was not changed.
And the circulator,
But that also is effective in the out years.
right, circulator, not,
That's not changed.
that's not changed.
I would say, I mean, we've gotten some comments on that. It was not a surprise, given the action with the budget last year. I think one of the greater concerns that council members had was that there really has been not enough planning about this transition as the circulator goes away. What discussions have taken place with WMATA? And I would say not enough discussions.
And then I know somebody asked, I didn't hear, what are you doing as far as the bike lanes on Connecticut Avenue? You're not going to stand in the way?
It's not in the committee print being circulated for tomorrow.
And then can I ask about, I know you mentioned it, but ERAP, exactly what does your budget hold for ERAP?
I think it's 26.9 million.
And that's it, that's an increase, correct?
It's an increase over what the mayor proposed.
Over what the mayor proposed.
Yes.
And then
I
if
will
could-
add that I think the situation in the District of Columbia with regard to affordable housing and rent instability needs to be looked at comprehensively. There are just a lot of stresses around that. What I'm circulating does not solve the problem with rapid rehousing and the fact that something like 2,200 families have received notices of termination from that program. We weren't able to address that, and it correlates with emergency rental assistance and the rest of the programming that we offer to try to prevent homelessness or to get people out of homelessness. It's just not working.
And then if I can go back to the conversation about the CFO, do you expect the CFO to certify this budget?
The opinion that we have from the Attorney General is that the CFO does not have to, quote, certify the budget. We are required under the Home Rule Act to adopt a budget where the expenditures do not exceed all available resources. This budget does not exceed all available resources. That's what the requirement is.
So, yeah, I don't know that you directly answered my question.
Well, the law doesn't.
I
We've
get,
all
I
thought
get
for
what the
years
AG has
that the-
said and what your position is. You've talked to the CFO.
Yeah.
It seems to me that what you're doing here, while it addresses his concerns, it doesn't address it in the manner that he would like to. You're not giving him the $217 million straight up front, correct?
Correct.
And so that's what he had asked for. So it sounds like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but do you expect him to certify this budget?
He's not I can't give you a
understand.
yes or no because he's not required to. So if I say no, then
But
it's
this
like,
would be unusual. This is, I believe, the first time that a CFO has not certified a budget. Is that not true? Okay.
Certifies the mayor's budget. We don't get a separate certification after the council.
Is the CFO required to weigh in on this budget? I mean, if this.
he will weigh in. We
Right,
will
so
have a
he'll weigh
fiscal
in.
we will
So-
have a fiscal impact statement.
Well,
We'll
let me ask you this then. If I go back to the ominous crime bill, which Mayor Bowser vetoed it, and you criticized her for vetoing it, saying, I'm paraphrasing your words, but that it opened the door for congressional interference, which is exactly what happened.
Correct.
Does this not do the exact same thing? Are you
No.
concerned?
No, I
Why
don't
are
think
you
so.
not concerned that this would open the door if Congress hears that the CFO is not certifying or not fond of what you're
No,
doing here?
Mark,
Are
you
you,
gotta, you gotta give me this much. The Attorney General's opinion revealed to all of us for the first time that the Home Rule Act does not require the CFO to, quote, certify, unquote, the budget. So he does not have to certify. If I say to you, no, he won't certify it, that could have a different interpretation, like he disagrees with the budget. That's my struggle with answering your question with a yes or no. I expect that the CFO will look at the budget and the Budget Support Act and issue a fiscal impact statement that says that the budget is balanced, that funds are sufficient for the budget and financial plan. I do not know whether he will say more, that there is a liquidity issue in 2028 that he's concerned about. He may or may not say that. And that has been his concern. I don't want to speak for him, and I don't want to get into much of an argument about it here because you've heard my views about that. So I expect that it's possible, maybe probable, that he will articulate that concern about liquidity. But with regard to whether the budget is balanced, it will be balanced, and we will have a fiscal impact statement that says that funds are sufficient.
thank you.
So, I mean, the issue really has gotten much more nuanced since it was first presented. When it was first presented, it was all about whether the budget was balanced or not, and whether he had to certify it. I've left you speechless. That's a good place. Yes, Michael.
Can you explain your move to eliminate the hotel tax increase that the mayor had proposed?
Yeah. First of all, it was purported to be for the E911 fund, but it wasn't. It was just another way of trying to get money into the general fund. Second of all, the hotels are very sensitive to what the tax burden is, because when they compete with other cities for conventions, that's one thing that the associations look at is what are these hotel taxes? So it's a very sensitive issue for hotels. Last year, might have been the year before, we actually increased the hotel tax on a temporary basis, the hotel tax, not this brand new made up 911 fee. We increased it on a temporary basis so that the funds would go to Destination DC to market the district to get more people to come. The hotel said, yeah, we will do this. We will take the risk of a higher tax and whatever effect that has in terms of our competing with other cities, because it's going to be used for marketing, which will get more people to come to the district. So on net, it will be good for us. This hotel tax that the mayor proposed had none of that. It was just straight up, we're going to increase how much people pay. And not only will it increase how much you pay, but as a hotel patron, when you get the bill, it won't just say hotel tax, it will now list several taxes, which I think is actually more obnoxious to patrons. There's nothing good about it. And we didn't need the money.
Okay, and can you explain why exactly we didn't need the money considering? the
Well, because what
911?
I'm circulating for tomorrow is balanced without that tax.
Okay, and then my second question, the mayor had written that she was concerned about a housing committee proposal to cut truancy prevention services by 30%. Are you familiar with what I'm referring to?
It depends.
Okay, well, she broadly mentioned a 30% reduction proposed by the housing committee.
Yes.
Did you keep any of that?
No.
Okay.
I left what the committee recommended. However, on the OSSI side, Office of State Education, we restored Show Up Stand Out, which is a truancy prevention program, $2.2 million, I believe. And we're moving it from Office of Victim Services and Justice Grants Administration. We're moving it from them to OSSI, Office of State Superintendent for Education. So no, I did not restore the full funding the mayor requested for Department of Human Services, but we did restore a cut the mayor took related to truancy in the Show Up Stand Out program. We got a lot of testimony about Show Up Stand Out. I had a hearing on all the budget bills on May 3rd. I got no testimony that I recall regarding the DHS cut. I will add, the mayor is trying to move truancy services from Child and Family Services Agency and the OVSJG, the Office of Victim Services Programs. She's trying to move that all over to DHS. There are roughly 5,000 referrals, maybe 6,000 referrals a year under current law. I do not see how DHS, which is struggling right now with homelessness and housing vouchers and migrant services, really struggling in a lot of areas. I do not see how they can just suddenly on October 1st handle 6,000 referrals from schools with regard to unexcused absences. DHS has a couple of programs that are very well regarded, ACE and PASS, that deal with truancy, actually with kids who have been extensively truant. But to take those programs which deal with maybe a couple hundred kids and suddenly dump thousands of kids on them, I think that runs the risk of destroying those programs. There are 4 bills pending in the council. I'm having a hearing middle of June on those 4 bills dealing with truancy and this issue of whether DHS should be involved. And we will work through that this year. So I think it's misplaced to restore that cut because I don't think DHS can handle this.
Okay, thanks. And unrelated, that staffer you mentioned to help
The budget,
detect budget
budget
waste,
officer.
is that something that's being formally proposed in the Budget Support Act as a new staffer for the council, or is that?
It's in it should be in the budget documents,
Okay.
an additional FTE with money in the council's budget office.
How much money?
You mean you want to know what the salary, are you thinking about changing job?
I do want to know the salary though.
I think it's roughly 140.
140?
Yeah.
Thousand. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes.
about being able to find dollars to either restore funding for certain programs or increase the funding. I know you were saying it's hard to definitively say this is where this comes from specifically. You might be picking in from different areas. But can you talk about how much of a dent not having to fill the fiscal reserve fund now, what kind of impact that may have made in terms of, is it thanks to that that you're able to restore funding to some other programs? If you can just kind of elaborate. Layman's terms.
Yeah, I would say no, but actually, as you asked a question, I realized I said earlier that the only direct link was sports betting and baby bonds, but actually there's a direct link, fiscal stabilization and pay equity. So not appropriating, I will say not appropriating mid-year to the reserves. And I phrase it that way because the law specifies how the reserves are funded. And they're funded out of year-end surplus. That's been the law for a decade. And so this appropriation would be unusual. Not doing the appropriation to fiscal stabilization, all that did was just put money back into pay equity.
Okay,
That's all it did. Didn't help any of the rest of the decisions.
and put money back into pay equity for
Pay
the
equity
multi-year or just for,
for the multi-year, 53 million a year.
sorry, one more clarification. Is that because the amount that would have been to fully fund the reserve more or less equated to what that program would have cost over the budget years?
Correct.
Thank you.
Actually, what the program would have cost at a reduced level. Remember, I said the mayor was looking to cut pay equity to about 53 million a year.
So it would have been at the mayor's proposal.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's why I had to find additional money. Sam.
Clarifying question, how did you handle the mayor's provisions around the Schools First and Budgeting Act that she added to the Budget Support Act?
We're not moving that she wants to repeal the schools first in budgeting. I have to give her credit. This year, she's honest and she doesn't like the bill. Let's repeal it. Last year, she just disregarded the law without asking to repeal it. But we're not, we struck that subtitle. That's not in what I'm circulating.
So in regards to what you did here with the math, you know, what's going through your mind about the possibility of having to do this year after year, you know, just given the mayor's feelings about the Schools First and Budgeting Act?
Well, it's a question of who gets tired first, and I'm not planning on getting tired. I think it's really horrible. Let me be clear. What happens is that the chancellor tells schools in February that you're going to get a budget that's less than what the Schools First law requires. And because you're getting a budget that's less, you're going to have to get rid of some teachers or some other positions. This is where it gets horrible, is that then the parents get upset and positions are identified. Could be a librarian, it might be the science teacher, it might be a counselor. And those people are like, well, I'm not going to stick around and see if maybe the council will put the money back in. In fact, they may not even be aware of this debate at the council. So they look for work elsewhere. And so the damage is done by these people leaving the schools. I'll note, because you're with the Informer, Ward 8 schools were hit the hardest by this. And Ward 8 schools are the schools that have the highest concentration of at-risk students. So you're just, you meaning the chancellor, by doing this, is creating enormous instability in these schools. I think it's just horrible. And I don't see what the long-term vision is on the part of the chancellor to keep reducing the budget for some of these schools. So Schools First lays out a formula. The formula is promotes stability in funding so that this doesn't happen. And then we can look at other measures such as what I have in this budget, which is increasing by 1 FTE every Ward 7 and 8 elementary school, or what we did a couple of years ago and we've been able to maintain, which is to create the at-risk concentration weight, which gets additional dollars to schools that have a large number of at-risk students. So stability first, and then look for ways that we can create greater equity in funding based on the need, which is at the number of at-risk students.
So as far as central office, in your eyes, is there any truth to their concerns about the impact of taking away funding?
Absolutely not.
And like, how do you?
They, what we have seen over and over again is a lack of budget discipline. Exhibit A is the laptop controversy last summer where they did not have a budget line for laptops and then blamed the council that we had cut laptops, then ultimately found the money for laptops. But the budget that I'm circulating reduces the cut to central from 30 million to 20 million, roughly. I will note that at 30 million, the CFO had certified all of the cuts, which is to say the CFO felt that the agency could perform. But what I'm circulating has a reduction of 20 million, not 30 million. I'll hand over here, Mr. Rice.
Have you had any conversations with the mayor about what you've just talked to us about? And if you have, do you think she's going to sign it or not sign it or what?
I've had several conversations with the mayor about the budget and most of these issues, maybe not all of them. I'm not going to speak to what she's going to do. Sorry.
Okay. May I try once more? Is there anything that you could tell us that she particularly opposed or supported?
If you want to know what she opposed, you could look at the letters that she sent to the council. I think it's safe for me to say that she supports the budget that she proposed. She liked what she proposed.
And what about the real estate tax increase?
Discussions I've had with her, she did not like that. I did not tell her that I was doing that, but it's been very much in the ether. And so she's expressed views on that.
Thank you.
I think I saw another couple of hands and then Lindsay's going to tell me at some point to wind this down. Michael.
Did you accept the recommendation from the Judiciary Committee to cut DCPS security contracts? That was something else the mayor raised in her letter, as well as cutting security at 21 other government facilities.
I didn't fully understand your question. So the budget that I circulated for the committee of the whole, the education budget that I circulated on May 7th, reduced DCPS Central by about 30 million. Included in that was roughly a $10 million reduction in the security line at DCPS. I've restored most of that.
Right.
Separately, the Committee on Facilities and Family Services reduced an increase in the security line at DGS. I talked with Councilmember Lewis George about this, and she was quite persuasive in why that reduction was reasonable. It's a reduction in the increase. There's still an increase in the budget at DGS for security services.
Okay, I think you understood my question. Okay, thank you.
That means I answered it. Great. One last question.
As it relates to the real estate tax, I'm trying to search through the document here. What is the increase there?
It's creating, I don't know if it's a new class or it's a subset, but residential property right now is taxed at 85 cents per $100. With this proposal, that 85-cent rate remains for all taxpayers, but for residential properties, not multifamily, that are valued over 2.5 million, the increment over 2.5 will be taxed at a $1 rate, not 85-cent rate.
Thank you.
So She was the last question, but for a home worth 2.6 million, it's a $184 increase. Guys are really taxing me. She was the last question. He was,
I was gonna do a
The
follow-up
one
question on
plus.
that, though.
he was the 1+, and now you're the 2+. Little under 6 million a year. Thank you all very much. So the committee of the whole scheduled to meet at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. And the legislative meeting will follow. Thank you again.